Welcome to the very first Clyde and Lomond Heritage, the podcast. I'm Paul Murdoch and I'm going to be talking in depth about various places, people and happenings that affected the area. And the area being West Dunbartonshire, Argyll Bute, anywhere, even parts of Stirlingshire. Anywhere basically that touches Loch Lomond or the Clyde we can chat about. There's no restrictions as such. And it might be a simple place like a church we explore and we look at its history and how it got to where it got to be. It might be a battle, it might be people that came into the area, and there's a lot going on in the world about people and migration and where they should be, where they shouldn't be, and as we'll find out as we go along, we all came from somewhere else originally to live in this area eventually. Where we can, we'll invite people along to talk about various items, various subjects and various places that they may have contact with and may be able to give us some more insight into. So I'm looking forward to that. The whole area, Clyde and Lomond, is absolutely dripping with history, whether it be the Romans, the Vikings, even before that. We'll look at some of the things we can find out and some of the things we know. Some might be conjecture in there sometimes as well, but we'll try and keep it as well researched as possible. I was born in Helensburgh, brought up in the area, well, Vale of Leven mostly. I'm now in Cardross, just over the hill, or Cardross. I need to be careful how I say that. Yes, and we'll look at all sorts of people and places in this whole area. I'm going to kick this whole thing off by keeping it very simple. I'm going to look at the very first church I went to, St Mungo's Church in Alexandria, and I'm going to look at its history. I'm going to look at its history via a lovely little book by the Reverend Joseph Wilding, my godfather as it happens, and I have so much love and time invested in that place, St Mungo's, that I thought it would be a lovely way to kick off the series. I'm going to look at all sorts of churches, all sorts of castles, all sorts of buildings, all sorts of places of interest. But let's start off with St Mungo's and find out a bit more about that place and how it came to be. Now, the little book I told you about earlier was called A History of St Mungo's Church, Alexandria, by the Reverend J. Wilding. Now, we all called him Father Wilding, or just Father in the case of our family. And Father wrote this little book in 1983, so there's been a few updates since then. A big sad one really, but we'll come to that at the very end of this little story. Anyway, this was written in 1983, and he retells the story of Miss Elizabeth Spoor, who became 100 on the 12th of November 1983. And it was of special significance because she was actually present at the laying of the foundation stone of the church in 1893. I actually knew Mrs. Spoor and most of the family there, and she had some great stories to tell about St Mungo's, and it was her stories and her centenary that prompted Father Wilding to write his short history of St Mungo's. Now, normally if somebody has got a book out on the area, I would love to get them in and chat to them about it, and we will definitely do that in upcoming episodes going forward. I'm going to start off with a little kind of poem, I guess, and the lines are from Tobias Smollett's poem To the Leaving Water, and they could be applied justifiably, I would think, to the men and women who built St Mungo's Episcopal Church in Alexandria. The little red sandstone church situated on Main Street was dedicated and opened for worship on the second Sunday of Advent, December 8th, 1894, by the Right Reverend W.T. Harrison, the Bishop of Glasgow and Galloway. Anyway, here are some lines from Tobias Smollett. An ancient faith that knows no guile, an industry embrowned with toil, and hearts resolved and hearts prepared, the blessings they enjoy to guard. Now, a report in the Lennox Herald from the time states that the service was highly Episcopal and that there was a fashionable attendance of all the leading families. At the evening service, the bishop was again present, and he preached a sermon on the text Haggai, chapter 2, verses 9. In this place will I give praise. The church, consisting of the nave only, measuring 65 feet by 30 feet, with seating for 250 worshippers, was constructed with a view to future extension. The architect, Mr. J. M. Crawford of Dumbarton, the church was built by a local builder, Mr. James Barlas, and the joinery work was done by Mr. James Shearer of Alexandria. The report also adds that the cost of the building was around £1,400. Further construction work was done by the congregation for a side aisle which was built in 1902 to 1903. It was kind of put in place when the priest in charge was called Reverend James G.S. Syme. The infilling in the arches of the nave was not removed, and the new aisle was not dedicated for worship but was used initially as a church hall for Sunday school. Between 1908 and 1909, the proper church hall was built during the incumbency of the first rector, the Reverend H. Boyce, who quite inappropriately was commonly referred to as Hip Hip Hooray Boys. Before the St Mungo's Church was actually built, there was a congregation gathering in Alexandria. In 1873, the Reverend William Stephen, the rector of Dumbarton, would walk each Sunday afternoon all the way from Dumbarton to conduct a service held in a shop premises in Bank Street. For some 15 years, this one service had to suffice. There was no administration to the sacraments, and Episcopalians in the Vale of Leven had to make the 4-mile journey into Dumbarton for baptisms, marriages, and to receive Holy Communion. However, the congregation grew steadily as the population of the district grew, and in 1889 they became a kind of independent mission with its own priest in charge. By 1890 they numbered some 300 souls. They were made up of Scottish folk, but many families from Lancashire in connection with the textile trade were also members of the Church of England, that they were part of the congregation too. But the largest part was of Irish extraction, who'd been members of the Church of Ireland, naturally kind of found their spiritual home in the Episcopal Church. Now, Mr. Hildesley, the priest in charge, wasn't content with the use of a hired hall. He was determined that the Episcopalians in the Vale of Leven should have their own church. A building fund was begun, and on January the 28th, 1891, an application for a grant of £200 towards the building fund was made to the Walker Trust in Edinburgh. However, their grant application failed, and it wouldn't be until 1892 till a second application was made that progress was made. The congregation gathered £645, but a further £400 at least was required. However, they had found a central site and had secured it. However, amongst all this going on, Mr. Hildesley, the priest in charge, unfortunately lost a baby son. And whether or not this was to do with it or not, but he eventually resigned as priest in charge at the end of that year. So in 1893, a second priest in charge, the Reverend Frederick Eads, was appointed, and efforts were redoubled towards the building of St Mungo's. In 1893, the foundation stone was laid by Mrs. Adair Campbell in the presence of the Bishop William Harrison of Glasgow, as we said earlier on, and of course it was witnessed by Mrs. Spooner, who was still alive when Father Welding wrote this little book back in 1983. Now, rewinding a little bit, let's go back to the 1850s or so, 1851. People in Alexandria, Episcopals as, they did go to Dumbarton via the railway. And this was kind of unheard of at the time. Railways didn't really run on a Sunday in Scotland, but they had special dispensation, and a light tank engine was authorised to run on Sunday mornings to convey worshippers only from the Vale of Leven to the Episcopal Church in Dumbarton. Now, later on in the podcast, I'll go into some detail about the history of the Episcopalian Church in Scotland, how it came about, and all that kind of stuff. So we'll do that later on in this podcast. But there was some history when the initial church was built in 1893. It wasn't all smooth sailing. It was a wee bit regrettable that some people didn't move from the Dalmonach Hall where they worshipped to the new St Mungo's Church, and they actually lost some of the original grassroots members who just couldn't make the adjustment from informal mission hall atmosphere to the more respectable, I guess, formal worship of the new church. There was many ups and downs with St Mungo's Church, and here are some, just to list a few. I guess the biggest up in the early days was the Argyll Motor Company coming to Alexandria in the early 1900s. They brought an influx of skilled workmen from England. Many of these found their way to St Mungo's to such an extent that the congregation numbered 1,000 members. Sadly, the big down came in 1914 when the company failed, leading to a big exodus, resulting in falling membership all the way back to 350 again. Unfortunately, the Argyll Motor Company didn't last too many years at all, and they got into trouble with litigation with I think Daimler in France, and their legal costs meant they could no longer continue as a company. Now, I reckon the Episcopal Church, certainly St Mungo's, has had a real cross-section of people in it. My dad was a slater and plasterer, and the Smollets also attended, so it was, all sorts of people came to St Mungo's. The Telfer Smollets, actually, of Cameron House became members of St Mungo's in the early 1900s. Major General Telfer Smollett, who is Lord Lieutenant in Dumbartonshire, was several years lay elector to the congregation and the rector's warden. His son, Patrick, actually then, when Father wrote this, filled both of these positions. My father was a warden also at the same time as Patrick Smollett, and we got to know the family a little bit, I guess. I think I actually sang at his daughter Gabrielle's wedding with a little high voice back in the 70s. Now, St Mungo's Church in Alexandria has had some notable people attend over the years, and one of them who certainly affected me and many other people was Margaret Harrison. She was a great campaigner for the CND, and she initiated the peace camp at Fast Lane and was a Sunday school teacher at St Mungo's, and she was very encouraging to myself when it came to writing and poetry, and she was a big poet herself. One of the things I will say about Margaret is her and Bobby, her husband, they used to cycle in from Dumbarton or to Alexandria, and they thought nothing of that, of course. Also, at the peak, I guess, of St Mungo's, I don't know, certainly in my lifetime would be the 70s, when Father Welding was the priest in charge, and there was a Barry's bus used to go around the whole of Halden and different parts of the Vale of Leven and pick people up and take them to the church, wait, and then pick them or drop them back off again. That's how kind of busy it was, and the Sunday school was pretty mobbed as well. Now, two fairly important dates were 1961, when the Lady Chapel was dedicated at the side chapel, and in 1978 the pipe organ was installed, and I was involved in that as well a little bit, and I helped the guy build it, put it together. I remember cutting up old GTX oil cans and turning them inside out, and they became the rings, the silver rings at the top of the pipes, and they used those rings to tune the pipes a little bit as well. So, and my reward for doing that work was a 50p 3-course lunch at the new Chinese restaurant in Bank Street, which was great. I loved that. Also, the Sunday school trips were pretty legendary. We used to get use of, I think it was a Sweeney's boat that took us up the loch to Cameron House quite often, and we'd dock at Cameron House and have all sorts of games and kind of sandwiches and have fun basically on the grounds and the big kind of bit of grass in front of the main house there, well before the hotel was built, and even before the bear park as well. Another good memorable trip, Sunday school trip, was to Inchcailloch, which we did a couple of times I think, and we all walked around the island together and had a picnic. It was great. I loved the whole sociable part of going to church, and I was a server because Father was my godfather. I was there 3 times a Sunday, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock and evensong at 5. And we of course stayed in the rectory all day pretty much on a Sunday, and I'd maybe go a walk up the hill with Father when I was a younger lad, or we'd play in the garden there with my brother Stuart and Angela. Yeah, it was nice times. And of course there was Mrs. Harrison was there. She would come across to the rectory after services as well, as did Nettie McNaught. Now Nettie and Margaret, I don't know if they really got on that well, but they were always there together, and they were total opposites. Nettie was really outgoing and kind of in your face. Margaret was much more mellow and laid back, so they were opposites, but they were lovely ladies, both of them, and they were really nice to myself and my brother and my sister. I've been an Episcopalian all my life, I guess, and I've never really known the origins of the Episcopal Church, where it came from, how it started. So I'm just going to look at that briefly now, because this is one of the good things about this podcast. It makes me do more research and find out more things about the area, but also larger subjects as well. I guess the origins of Christianity in Scotland go right back to St Ninian, who conducted the first Christian mission around about Whithorn area down in the south of Scotland, southwest. Then in 563 AD, St Columba travelled to Scotland, and of course he established, he had land in Iona granted to him near the Isle of Mull, and he sort of started his mission from there and started evangelising, and the whole west coast soon became Christians, I guess. He converted many Picts to Christianity. The Scottish Catholic Church would continue to grow over the centuries that followed, and St Margaret of Scotland, the Queen Consort of Malcolm III of Scotland, strengthened the Church's ties with the Holy See, as did successive monarchs as well. All was going in that kind of direction until the Scottish Reformation was formalised in 1560. And that's when the Church of Scotland broke with the Church of Rome. In 1572, the Acts of 1560 were approved by the young James VI. But under pressure from many of the nobles in the land, the Concordat of Leith also allowed the Crown to appoint bishops with the Church's approval. John Knox, the man behind in many ways the Reformation, had no clear views in the office of bishop. He preferred to call them superintendents, but in response, I guess two parties emerged, one that wanted bishops and one that didn't. And the Scottish Episcopal Church began as a distinct church, I guess, in 1582, when the Church of Scotland rejected episcopal government. Episcopal means governed by bishops, and they adopted a Presbyterian governed by elders instead. In the 1600s, control swung back and forth between the Presbyterian and Episcopal models, depending on the monarch, I guess. Bishops were imposed under the Stuarts, then removed again after political upheaval. After something called the Glorious Revolution, Presbyterians, this was in 1689, Presbyterianism became the established Church of Scotland. Episcopalians were pushed to the margins and often persecuted, especially because many supported the Jacobite cause. You'll find many wee Episcopal churches dotted around the Highlands of Scotland in quite remote places, and they were linked to the Jacobites quite a bit. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the church stabilised and grew modestly, and even now Episcopals only represent about 1%, in fact less than 1% of the Scottish population. So it's the third biggest church in Scotland. It's behind the Church of Scotland and then the Catholic Church. Now, the Episcopal Church was often known sometimes as the Laird's Church, because a lot of the landowners decided to attend the Episcopal Church. And case in point, Patrick Telfer Smollett of Caman House attended St Mungo's in Alexandria, as did the Scott Parks and many other families, landowners in the area. It was also known as the English Church because it's in full communion with the English Church, well, the Church of England, and other Anglican Lutheran churches as well. So some people called us the English Church. It didn't ever bother me. The Episcopal Church was always my home. However, things haven't been going well for religion in Scotland, really, especially the Christian religion. Numbers have been tumbling. Just as an example, in 2001, 2,146,000 people identified as Church of Scotland. 2022, 1,107,000. That's halved pretty much. And as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, it's gone down as well. The percentage identifying as Roman Catholic in 2001 was 15.9% of the population, and 2022 down to 13.3%. So down, but not as radical as other religions in the area. As far as the Episcopals are concerned, well, they're down to probably about 15,000 people now reporting as being specifically belonging to the Scottish Episcopal Church, and that's compared to 34,000 back in 2013. So everything's kind of plummeting, really, and the trend isn't stopping there. Most people identify now as non-religious in Scotland, over 51%. So things have changed, and if you go to, well, even you just see people come out of church, you can see it. The age, the demographic who go to church and still attend are very old compared to In my day, there was a real broad spectrum of ages. So it's really just the older generation that are hanging on, keeping places open. Unfortunately, St Mungo's Church in Alexandria became a victim of this decrease in attendance, and it was closed down eventually. I went to the last service there, the deconsecration, and it's closed for worship officially on the 29th of August 2021. Very, very sad. And Father Welding would be turning in his grave if he knew. And he probably does know. Anyway, most of the diehards, members who used to go to St Mungo's, are now going to the Episcopal Church in Dumbarton or Helensburgh. Yeah, sad times. I looked up what it's going to become of the building. A lot of churches have fallen victim to arson in the area, or just have been left to collapse, like the one in Renton, which is really sad. So I'm pleased to say they sold the church on, and as far as I'm aware, I think June 2025, it was a planning application was submitted for the church to be converted into 4 dwelling houses. So we'll see if that happens, and at least it'll be getting used for some positive purpose, I guess. So that was kind of the end of this little first episode of the podcast, the Clyde and Lomond Heritage Podcast, where we'll look at places and even people in the area that have affected our heritage and have added to the history of the area. That was Mungo's Episcopal Church in Alexandria. It was a bit of a sad tale really, but you get to know a wee bit more about the religion and some of the people that went there, and there's a lot of happy times there. So, and I will put Father Welding's book up on the internet on my website. I'll photocopy the pages. It's not a big book, and anybody wants to read it in detail, they can do on my website. That's www.paulmurdoch.co.uk, and I'll have it there for you to look at if you want more information or to read the book all the way through. Just for anybody who's listening, if they want to contribute in any way, if they were a member of St Mungo's or they have any memories of St Mungo's in Alexandria they want to share, that'd be brilliant. If you have any suggestions for another show to concentrate on something else, another place in the area that you're fond of or something you might know about, please again contact me. And you can contact me on the email address, which is clydeandlomondheritage@gmail.com. Okay, bye for now.